Hello, good morning, and welcome to China Now, your trusted source for the latest in global affairs, with a focus on one of the most dynamic and influential countries on the world stage. From shifts in political power to groundbreaking technological advancements, and from economic strategies to social transformations, China is rapidly shaping the future of not only its own citizens, but the entire global landscape. My name is Makiza Latifa. Let's get started with China Currents with Lisa, where we'll delve into the key trends defining China's trajectory, what they mean for its people, its neighbors, and the rest of the world. Our topics today includes China's decision to invest over $50 billion to support the development of Africa, the leaders of US and UK intelligence agencies claiming that China poses a real danger to the global order, and other very topical stories as well. Stay tuned as Lisa breaks down the stories that matter with experts, insights, and in-depth analysis.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on what's happening in China. I'm Lisa. In this episode, Ukrainian diplomat provoked both China and the United States with one sentence. China decided to invest over $50 billion to support Africa's development. Russia achieved 292 agreements worth $61 billion with China. The leader of US and UK intelligence agency claimed China poses a real danger to the global order. Let's start with Ukraine. On the 3rd of September, Ukrainian ambassador to Japan, Sergei Kosansky, made a highly controversial visit to Japan's Yasukuni Shrine. The Ukrainian embassy in Japan stated the visit was to pay tribute to the martyrs who sacrificed for their country. This statement was immediately busted by China's official media, which criticized Ukraine for affronting the people of China and other Asian countries. It is important to know that Yasukuni Shrine honors several Class A war criminals, those responsible for planning and executing the war of aggression against China and the US and many other Southeast countries during World War II. Among them, Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander of the Pearl Harbor attack, Masaharu Homa, who orchestrated the Bataan Death March that slaughtered 75,000 American and Philippine prisoners of war, Iwano Matsui, who was responsible for the Nanking Massacre that killed 300,000 Chinese civilians. Regarding the act of visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, CNN once pointed out that not only would it complicate relations between Japan and its neighbors, but also with its most important ally, the US. The wars they waged resulted in the deaths of an estimated 35 million soldiers and civilians in China alone, with another 4 million lives lost in the Pacific. These Japanese leaders were tried by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East and executed for their war crimes. Yet today, these same individuals are referred to as martyrs by the Ukrainian embassy. And this sparked outrage in China, particularly among regions that were formerly occupied by Japan. Chinese society is angry but also feels sorry for the United States. As of May 2024, the US has provided nearly $175 billion in aid and military assistance to Ukraine. Yet Ukraine paid tribute to war criminals who attacked US and massacred American prisoners of war. This has left many wondering, what message is Ukraine sending to its biggest supporter? The Ukrainian embassy also seems to forget the fact that Japanese forces once killed many Ukrainians. In 1939, Japan launched an attack on the Soviet Union and even used chemical weapons such as mustard gas, resulting in more than 9,000 killed and 15,000 injured, many of whom were Ukrainians serving in the Red Army. Estimates suggest around 7 million Ukrainian citizens fought in the Soviet forces during the World War II, accounting for approximately approximately 23% of the total number of the armed force of the USSR. Some Soviet soldiers who were attacked by Japanese chemical weapons could not be identified because of skin ulcers. This made it very challenging for us to verify how many Soviet soldiers from Ukraine were sacrificed in Siberia. For China, the date of this visit was particularly provoking. September the 3rd marks the anniversary of China's victory over Japan in World War II, a day commemorating the end of immense suffering and loss. To see Ukraine, a country now seeking China's assistance in facilitating peace talks with Russia, honoring the war criminals responsible for such death and devastation in Asia, has fueled widespread resentment. After causing great controversy, the Ukrainian embassy in Japan deleted this part of the tweet the day after the visit on September the 4th. However, the post was screenshotted by many netizens, as they said if Ukraine really wants to gain China's sympathy, then an old Chinese saying may be most appropriate. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And if Ukraine really wants to pay tribute to the martyrs who sacrificed for their country, maybe there are more suitable places for them to visit in Moscow. Next up, let's move to the latest diplomatic achievement between China and Africa. On the 5th of September, more than 50 African leaders gathered in Beijing for the 2024 Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or 4CIC. At the summit's opening, Chinese President Xi Jinping made a significant pledge, $50.7 billion in funding to support development initiatives across Africa over the next 3 years. This new financial commitment represents a 27% increase from the previous 4CIC summit in 2021. The funding will go towards 30 major infrastructure projects across the continent, 3 times the number pledged in 2021. Aimed at creating at least 1 million jobs in Africa. Following the opening ceremony, delegations from both sides adopted the Beijing Declaration aimed at fostering a shared future in the new era alongside the Beijing Action Plan for 2025 to 2027. These initiatives signals deeper cooperation in critical sectors such as industry, agriculture, infrastructure, trade, and investment. Just 2 days after the summit began, tangible outcomes are already emerging. On September the 8th, a shipment of frozen lamb from Madagascar arrived in China Hunan province, marking the first time China has imported lamb from an African nation. China's mutton consumption is expected to hit 5.74 million tons in 2023, and the market size has reached $110 billion. This move will provide lucrative sales channels for African herders and one of the best quality ingredients for Chinese tables. Senegal's President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, co-chair of 4CIC, expressed his gratitude to China, calling the partnership an effective collaboration. Mauritania's President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, who also chairs the African Union, hailed the China-African relationship as a leading model for South-South cooperation. However, the summit was not without controversy. Western governments and media outlets have long accused China of engaging in so-called debt trap diplomacy, alleging that China forces African countries to exchange natural resources for infrastructure investments. A recent report from the BBC on September the 7th claimed that China is often accused of burdening African nations with unsustainable debt. However, according to research by London-based think tank Chatham House, China accounts for only 12% of Africans' total private and public external debt. Experts suggest that if Africa is facing a debt crisis, attention should perhaps be directed at its largest creditor, such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. As discussion continues, all eyes are on the next step in this evolving China-Africa partnership, which promises significant economic impact on both continents. Stay tuned for more updates. In Asia, there are also good news from the diplomatic community. On the 3rd of September, the East Economic Forum (EAF) kicked off in Russia with more than 6,000 participants from 76 countries and regions. Almost 300 agreements worth $61.4 billion were signed at the East Economic Forum. Advisor to Russian President and Secretary of the EAF Organizing Committee, Anton Kobyakov, said on Friday, Chinese Vice President Han Zheng attended this forum and delivered a speech, expressing that China is committed to deepening cooperation in Northeast Asia. Member of Russian State Duma Committee on Small and Medium-Sized Business Alexei Govyrin told TASS that China is keen to collaborate with Russia's technology company. He noted that China's experience in developing technology parks is particularly valuable for Russia. While China and Russia are busy creating wealth, the US and UK are busy creating wars. According to a report by CNN on September the 8th, CIA Director Bill Burns spoke at a joint public event with MI6 Chief Richard Moore. The pair highlighted the importance of the two countries' intelligent partnership at a time when global order is, quote, under threat. Burns accused China of offering dual-use items to Russia poses a real danger. However, there is no clear definition of what specific products fall under the category of dual-use items. It is not the first time that CIA hyped the threat from China. On the 30th of January of this year, the CIA significantly ramped up efforts to collect, execute, and analyze intelligence related to China. He noted that over the past 2 years, the portion of the US budget allocated to China has more than doubled, and the CIA is actively recruiting more Mandarin speakers to strengthen its operation in countering China. Since Chinese soldiers also speak Mandarin, this dual-use language could pose a real danger inside the CIA. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. We look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
Thank you very kindly for the updates, Lisa. Up next is the Thinkers Forum, and our thinkers and scholars are poised and ready to bring you very sharp perspectives on global issues. First on our list is Biljana Vankovska, a full professor of international relations and peace studies, who doubles as the head of the Global Changes Center.
The Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci, whose main idea about cultural hegemony is central in his philosophy. So it is exactly what the West is doing with its colonies: brainwashing, propaganda, cultural hegemony. Oh, in my region, there is mushrooms after the rain. Various NGOs who work on detection of fake information and malicious influences from abroad, meaning Russia and China, of course. It is an unnatural atmosphere where you are raised to stick around and see enemies instead of friends. And even a normal information about some achievement, some fabulous bridge or highway or whatever is built in China or in Africa due to China expertise and support, is taken as an offense to the West that is in decline, that cannot actually maintain its own bridges and railroads. There is a lot of this soft power investment from the West to keep up this, as I said, brown sahibs, these submissive, loyal people who would sell their soul to the devil just to earn some grants and some money to do something for a living. Politicians are usually easy to scare because they're dependent. You know, if you don't claim your legitimacy and power on the ground of voter support, public support, then, and you know that you owe somebody else for that position, then you are dependent, and they are scary. And actually, even in our political science terminology, we invented a new word for this phenomenon, stabilitocracy, which means that the West is choosing the leaders that are obedient, that would provide stability, which means no change, no other options. only the Western agenda and narrative. If they are dishonest or corrupted, or they're going to forgive them or turn the blind eye on these deals. But they would never really accept someone who speaks the truth. Mr. Orban, to be honest, is not my favorite politician because I'm a leftist and he takes a different part of the political spectrum, which is fine. But what he says about the global affairs makes sense, unlike the things that are said by the president of the EU Commission. I mean, there are two different ways of looking to the world. The same applies even maybe to Mr. Trump, that I'm not fond of him at all, but what he says, unlike his opponents on the Democratic side, makes sense in terms of let's have a dialogue, let's talk about ceasefire, about different worlds. Why should we raise our children in the atmosphere of fear-mongering, war-mongering, Russophobia, xenophobia, various phobias? It is unhealthy atmosphere. I mean, we should really provide a positive atmosphere for the young generations to have something to believe in, to live for, to fight for in a positive way, not militarily. What makes me feel really, really upset is the situation in Gaza. I just could not believe that during the electoral campaign that we had months ago in my country, not a single politician spoke about Gaza, or do we have a position as Macedonia, as a state, with respect to various peace plans. The West is actually doing peace prevention. They are inciting wars because obviously military-industrial complex and blah, blah. War is more profitable than peace. They see things in that abnormal way, I would say, because the price is paid by ordinary people. I just can't live with the fact that over 30,000 children died so far in Gaza, that we are watching Olympic Games and having summer vacations or whatever. So it is really heartbreaking. So these latest developments about the assassination of the Hamas leader is exactly an example how some forces work on prevention of peace, prevention of mediation, prevention of negotiation, or bringing the warring parties together for the sake of the people. This complex is, let's say, powerful, but not invisible. We just have to feel empathy and solidarity with the people of Gaza. Of course, the same applies to Ukrainian people. I'm not dividing them. But the fact that the Western media shows, such crocodile tears shedding over European conflict, people with white skin, blue eyes, that is racism, that is stereotyping the victims, the conflicts, that some lives matter. At my university in 1990s, we established the Balkan Peace Center at my Faculty of Philosophy in Skopje. And we enrolled the first generations of students in peace studies. And all of a sudden it stopped. We do have a peace program. We can enroll students, but there is no interest. They are more interested into defense studies, security studies. It is a militarized mind. And when I mention the academia part of it, I'm talking about militarizing the academia. Academia is supposed to be a place to spread ideas about the best in the human beings and in human history and civilization, the ideas of goodness, of well-being, of care, empathy about the other. But things are really moving in a very, very bad directions. And the world is on one side on the brink of disaster. On the other side, there is a lot of possibilities, a lot of developments that bring back hope. And China is always, as I make this analysis of this new initiative, let alone Belt and Road Initiative, but also BRICS and other multilateral initiatives, you find China as a consistent player promoting really a global agenda of a just world. I know that China pays respect very much to UN Charter and the UN order that is enshrined in the Charter. I don't know if it's sustainable because things go too fast, but we can even improve that model because it is not quite just to all the countries. The 5 permanent members in the Security Council, of course, have the privilege. They can make blockades and sabotage. Gaza is an obvious victim of this situation nowadays, where it's impossible to even intervene in a humanitarian way decently. So China, first of all, deserves all the respect for the things the country leadership did for its own people, because you can speak to the others on the ground of what you achieved at home, how you made your citizens satisfied, prosperous, optimistic youngsters who are looking forward to next things behind the hill. They want to discover things, to create the world in a better way, instead of crying over the future or maybe being recruited for a Ukrainian war. So only a country that has proven successful at home has dignity and right to talk to others and to be a good example. And then on a foreign policy field, of course, what I appreciate so much is that unlike the West, who has been intervening in my region, but then later, from NATO intervention 1999, then Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, not to mention now what's going on in Venezuela. That is the main problem. And they are prone to these medicines and quick fix. Let's do it fast and make Greece and Macedonia sit down, sign a treaty, and that's over. No. China has a long-term perspective. China, in my view, is not rushing, is not having imperialistic, megalomaniac ideas. It just gives a platform for all the nations to come together and to talk. I just can't understand that days ago, the new European Union chief of diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, said that she would not talk to Putin because he is a war criminal. It's her job to talk to even to bad guys. Let's put it that way. I mean, she doesn't have a problem talking to Netanyahu or to U.S. presidents who are war criminals by default. But Mr. Putin is the main problem. It is a hypocrisy that makes people angry. So I think that diplomacy is exactly the right thing to do when things go badly, when you have to put all things around the table, all actors, regardless how bad feelings they have, because diplomacy and negotiations are the only way to come to some kind of solution. In this moment, we need, it is even sad to say that ceasefire is something that we want to see badly. Ceasefire, which is not peace. Even when we talk about ceasefire, we are labeled like, these guys are pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, pro-anti-NATO or anti-Western. So it is like in Orwellian world, war is peace, peace is war. China, I would like to really pay respect to this latest initiative about bringing together all fractions of Palestinian organizations and leaders around the table to make them comfortable to talk to each other, to design their future Palestinian state, or to find a solution in the long run. At the same time, we witnessed a scandalous opening ceremony of the Olympic Games that sent a message of cultural decadence of the West. It is what they can produce, and they invited Israel to take part, but not Russia and Belarus. I don't know why. We need an honest broker, someone who doesn't have blood on its hand. China has no bloody history. China gives opportunities for cooperation without strings attached. And one last thing, what I appreciate in the current global strategy of China is having in mind, various aspects of peace in the world: ecological, civilizational, security, multilateralism, and development. So these are the things that combine itself, and it is, if we talk about peace as a positive peace, not only ceasefires and stop of direct violence, then we talk about all these things together, because it's hard to divide them and to separate them, because, economic problems are related to ecological one, to devastation of natural resources, depletion, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that we should all take the China's policy as our own, but it is a platform for dialogue. And let's talk about all these things that China already has in mind.
Next on the Thinkers Forum is Michael Brenner, who is a professor of international affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. An aspect of his submission talks about illegal immigration in Britain. According to him, there's been a lot of legal immigration from former British colonies in Asia and Africa in particular, India and Pakistan and Ceylon. This goes back decades. Stay with us for more details.
In Britain, the issue is they talk a lot about illegal immigration, and to think in terms of a nativist English nationalism or British nationalism. It stems from sort of tensions over the immigration issue. But there's been, of course, a lot of legal immigration from former British colonies in Asia and Africa, in particular India and Pakistan and Ceylon. This goes back, decades. Most of them have been well integrated into British society. Almost all of them came with at least some knowledge of English, many of them quite fluent in English. And Britain, certain areas of British public services are critically dependent on these immigrants. You look at, particularly in the health sector, the percentage of doctors and nurses and other health professionals of South Asian ancestry is extraordinarily high. But this has still left a residue of immigrants who are seen as somehow rivals for social status, if not for employment and jobs, among Britain's less educated, working class and middle class population. And this is a segment of society which has counterparts on the continent, all across Western Europe. These are people who feel that they, in effect, have been abandoned by the government. Why do they feel that they've been abandoned? Well, it's not mainly immigration from abroad. That makes some of them very uncomfortable. And there are these elements of pure racism, if you like. But it's mainly economic. And that is, all across the West, economic inequality has been growing over the last 20 years. In the United States, it began in the 1970s. Mean incomes for working class Americans in 2010 were no higher than they were in 1973, discounting for inflation. And so the gap between the well-off, the comfortable, at the very top, of course, are all of the 1% or the 0.1%, the billionaires who are proliferating, and those whose employment is not only less remunerative and whose living standards, because of the last waves of inflation, which were caused by first COVID, the breakdown of supply chains, and then by the spike in energy prices caused by the rather self-defeating decision to dispense with energy from Russia, has made them feel poorer, made them feel neglected. This is what has fed the kinds of free-floating discontent, which has led to the rise of these far-right movements, which in extreme forms you can call neo-fascist. They're all very sort of, autocratic, all have common characteristics, if you like. And their success in establishing themselves as significant players in electoral politics, in a way, represents a regression in European public affairs, and quite a serious challenge to political leadership in all of these countries, and a striking alienation. It reflects a striking alienation of a significant part of the population from the leaders. And you can go and leaders across Europe have become quite unpopular. Macron in France was soundly rejected indirectly in the French elections. Mr. Scholz and his unstable coalition in Germany has favorable ratings for his party, the SPD, the old Socialist Party, something around 14%. In the polls, his party gets less support than the new far-right party. Same thing has happened in the Netherlands and in Sweden. Now, in Britain, you don't have the party. You have this party led by Mr. Farage, the Reformist Party, which is really, though, based upon those disaffected from the Conservative Party, rather than workers. And this has led to a peculiar situation in Great Britain, in which the two major parties, the Conservatives, the Tories, and the Labour Party, are very similar in their policies and their approaches and their philosophy, with the Labour Party becoming what English commentators call Tory light, which is just a mild version of Tory thinking and philosophy and policies, and which leads a very large segment of the populace and the electorate feeling, dispossessed, if you like. And so we'll see what one of it. We might just note that Mr. Starmer's Labour Party, which in terms of seats in Parliament won this overwhelming historic victory, received only 33% of the vote, which was, by the way, the lowest total Labour Party has received since World War II. And that's because of the collapse of the Conservatives. And so he has no mandate, and he has no really firm base of support under the British system. He'll still have very considerable latitude in pushing his own policies, but he has no answer. And the Labour Party has no answers to Britain's ills, its economic problems. And so I think the instability in Britain will grow in the future. They have no answers. They're introduced using the same austerity policies that the Tories followed for 14 years, and which have been a complete failure. And cutting themselves off from the European Union, through Brexit in 2016, has had all of the negative economic consequences, which knowledgeable people predicted. And then, of course, Britain, like everywhere in the West and very pronounced United States, is you have this, very unequal distribution of wealth, or redistribution upwards, and a bad deterioration in public services. I mean, the British is the National Health Service, which was introduced into World War II, and which is dear to the hearts and concerns of most Britons, which are always very proud of it, is disintegrating because it is being kept on an austerity budget, and it cannot provide the services. You have to, some of the effects are almost unbelievable. People waiting a year or 18 months in order to get some basic, an MRI done, something like that. And it's so libraries are restricted, public utilities have been sold off. So you have accumulated over the last 14, 15 years or so, a significant deterioration in the overall standards of living of most Britons. And as I said, Labour has no response, no viable response to this. So their troubles, their serious troubles, are not the ones you see today. They're just minor reflections of deeper ills. And more serious consequences are likely to manifest themselves down the road. Basically, all the European countries, particularly the old members of the European Union, essentially as Western Europe, think the same way. They all share the same political philosophy, and they all have the same conservative bias. Their economies all have the same problems. They find it very difficult to adapt themselves to a changing world in which there's a redistribution ongoing from the West, to other parts of the world, especially, of course, China is the most striking case in point, but other countries as well. And they find it very difficult to adapt this to these circumstances in terms of both economic thinking, in terms of how they imagine their place in the world, and in the sort of vague area we might call status or self-esteem or whatever. And so that is compounding their own purely internal difficulties. That is occurring independent of, although aggravated by, Europe and the United States' rather diminished role, relatively speaking, in the world economy. So it's like a double, not a crisis, because it may be a crisis objectively speaking, but it's not recognized as a crisis. So you have a double crisis, an internal one, and a one that might, speak of as the place in a rapidly changing world system. And of course, the United States faces that situation, or isn't, and is in that situation in even more important respects than Europe. And it's following, to my mind, policies which are not contributing to any alleviation of it, but significant aggravation of it. The belief by American policymakers that there was a competitive, not just competitive in commercial terms, but that China's growing economic strength represented a challenge, not a threat, to American influence. And it was President Donald Trump who began the process of applying economic sanctions on China. That was greatly accentuated under the Biden administration. And the point I'm making at this moment in regard to the European factor in the equation is that Washington began to pressure its European allies to join them in this pattern, this program of sanctions, of going beyond sanctions, of restrictive economic intercourse with China, especially in regard to the financing of in a high-tech area. And now, of course, which is broken out into a veritable mercantilist approach and war, in which the Biden administration has tried to greatly diminish American participation in the high-tech areas of China, and to make the United States less dependent and more self-sufficient, like in the domain of semiconductors. And this sort of radical policy, whose roots are to be found in overall grand American strategy, in effect was imposed on the Europeans. So what you see is the United States as European partners, following the United States in its wake, as they say, and increasingly, introducing and implementing more of their own, more and more restrictive measures, almost across the board, whether ranging from imports of electric sort of vehicles to trying to sort of shift suppliers of computer chips, but the whole panoply of barriers that Washington has been trying and has been erecting between the United States and China, economic barriers, have been adopted by the Europeans. One might say it was certainly against their interest. It would be wrong to say it was against their will because they didn't have enough will to resist it. And that raises the question, well, as I said, it's mainly because Europeans lack any political will, they lack unity. They have not found a need, although in objective terms they have had a need, to think through their own strategic interests, quite apart from whatever lead or direction is coming from Washington. So Europeans, in fact, don't exercise any significant political will on their part. And they live in a dependency relationship with the United States, which dates back to the Cold War. And they have lost the aptitude and this self-confidence to assert themselves in any way which could run counter to American thinking. So, in effect, Europe really don't count on the international scene insofar as they deny themselves to the latitude to make autonomous judgments and to pursue autonomous policies in any way different from or divergent from what the American line is.
And that's all for this edition of China Now. I hope it's been informative and educative as always. Please don't forget to send in your comments, thoughts, feedback, and suggestions through the email provided below. My name is Makiza Latifa, and I will see you same time next week. Have a lovely day.